So I just wanted to clear a few things up. From people's comments, then I got the idea that they were under the impression that basically the only message I have is that you need to exert yourself, or things are a lot more difficult than you think they are, and unless you're diligent, then it's not going to come to any benefit. And whereas that's true, that is not the only message that I have to give, and it's not the only message that I've been trying to convey to you. It seems that nobody really understands the principal message that I'm trying to get across. Now, it is the case that things are not easy on the spiritual path, but ignorance is bliss. Most people just want to be lied to. They want to be told it's easy and there's nothing specific they need to do, and they want to be given something to do, some kind of homework. So they want to be told, just rest in the present moment, or look at a candle, or a sort of picture of a Buddha, or visualize something. These days, then people are kind of thinkers, I say. And so they want to be given concepts. They want concepts to play with. And for example, they want to be told there are things like the universal consciousness, or told where thoughts come from and where they go to, and be given the reasons and explanations for why the universe exists, and for it all to sound very convincing, and that to be their practice or their meditation. We like the idea of having an authority who somebody we see to be learned and experienced, and we want them just basically to tell us what to do and take all the hard work out of it. So there's two kinds of hard work you need. You need to apply yourself. And you need to apply yourself, whether that's to normal Shinny meditation. So if I've given you a candle to look at, then you need to be diligent looking at that candle. If Rupert Spira tells you to meditate on I am, then you need to be diligent with that if you want to see some results. And these are all beneficial things. And the reason why we need to be diligent is because we have this sort of infinite lifetimes of negative habituation. We've got very bad habits, basically. That's what the Buddha taught. If you don't believe in past lives, then you could just say that you've got very bad habits that you developed in this life, and that's exacerbated by your negative kind of genetic traits and negative sort of environment, if you want to believe the scientific paradigm. So either way, we've got bad habits and we need to undo them, and to undo them isn't easy. And we can see that very clearly, right? Because if I've got the habit of smoking, then it's just not a matter of saying, well, today I'm no longer going to smoke. People suffer with it. I mean, some people are exceptional individuals and they can just decide to stop being alcoholics and being drug addicts, but it's not like that for most of us. It's difficult, right? We have to apply ourselves. I used to smoke myself, and it was a very difficult thing to give up. Drinking alcohol was also a very difficult thing to give up. Am I telling you to give up smoking and drinking? No, I'm not telling you to. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just trying to explain my position. So from one side, we have to apply ourselves because we need to undo our negative habits, whatever those are. Whatever those negative habits are you think that are afflicting you, then it takes effort in order to kind of undo those negativities. And so, for example, if you've got the negative habit of getting angry at your spouse, well, that's not a good thing, right? None of us think that's a good thing. We want to get rid of that. And we want to be a more pleasant person. And it's not just like telling ourselves, it's no good to be angry, that we'll get rid of that. Now, there's a lot of teachers out there. They call themselves non-dual teachers. Whether they are actually non-dual teachers is debatable. But their advice can be very helpful, because these sort of kind of logical arguments, ideas, and concepts that you play with help to kind of erode at your negative habits. It's a kind of psychological trick, If you say the self doesn't exist, well, that individual isn't going to suddenly realize no self just because you tell them the self doesn't exist. But by working with that, and also being diligent with that process, then it's possible they may erode their kind of negative habits little by little. But ultimately, it's not kind of, any profound spiritual practice. So you have to be diligent with these instructions you're given, whichever they are. However simple those instructions are, you need to be diligent. And also, if they're very complex, you need to be diligent. You have to be diligent in your studies. And that is an important message. And that is something that I've repeated time and time again. And I've also repeated this message that don't be fooled that it's easy or there's a shortcut. That's extremely negative for your spiritual practice, to think there's some kind of shortcut and then it can be very easy. And most spiritual teachers are just selling these kind of shortcuts. And the reason why they're selling them is because it's very attractive to people. If I tell you I've got a shortcut, it's very easy. In 5 minutes, you can realize the truth of this practice and then you'll be set up for the rest of your life. It'll cost you $100. Then I'm going to make a lot of money, right? I'm going to make lots of portions of $100 because there's lots of people looking for a shortcut. That doesn't mean that these teachers have bad intentions, that they're just trying to con you. I mean, there are con men out there. For the most part, these teachers are well-intentioned. And the problem is that they've kind of deceived themselves into believing they're awakened or that they found an easy way. But the proof is in the pudding, right? The results are there for somebody who puts these methods into practice. So if there's lots of students, they've put these methods into practice, they remain the same individuals they were before, or they're not special in any way, then it means that the instructions aren't special in any way, if they've applied themselves to it, sincerely and wholeheartedly. So the first aspect of diligence is you've got to apply yourself to your practice. Now, this other main point that I've made over and over again is that there is a difference between meditating on objects and concepts than meditating on the true nature of reality. And also I've suggested that this kind of meditation on the true nature of reality is the ultimate goal of spiritual practice. It doesn't mean that that particular practice is better for an individual. I would say, in fact, that this kind of practice isn't for everybody. It's for very few people. There are very few individuals who are suitable to do this kind of practice or who will even understand it. Now, I've been trying to point out in a very clear and systematic way what these differences are between meditating on objects and concepts and meditating on actual percepted reality. But it seems like nobody has any idea what I'm talking about. I haven't really heard any kind of feedback from anyone that suggests they even have any idea of what I'm talking about. But that doesn't matter because, as I said, most people aren't suitable for this kind of practice, and most people aren't looking for this either. So there's this idea that all religion is the same, and I refute that wholeheartedly, and I've made many videos on that, so you can check one of those out. So at the end of this, then there will be some link to one of these videos that explains why I believe that all religion is not the same. Again, just to recap, I'll give you a very, very, very simple example. In Christianity, it teaches if you worship any other god than the God of Abram, then you're going straight to hell, basically. And there's no reprieve from that. That's eternal. In Hindu religion, it teaches that you should worship all gods equally. So those are completely opposite viewpoints, aren't they? So we can set that aside. Those religions are basically different, completely different. There's the hedonists who don't believe in soul, don't believe in karma, cause and effect or rebirth. So that's very different from Buddhism, isn't it? I mean, we can all accept that. So if I say, no, it's not the case that all religions are the same. They have differences, and their differences is based on their view, meditation, and conduct. Right? That's one statement. And if I say no one religion is better than another for a particular individual, those are not contradictory statements in any way. They're just different statements. The reason why no particular religion is better than another in the context of a particular individual is that some things are more suitable to some people. And this is primarily based on their goals and their orientation. So if I'm just looking to reduce my kind of neurotic clinging to the reality of my thoughts, for example, I was afflicted when I was young by someone who had abused me, and that kind of plays on my mind throughout my life. I can do a practice that erodes the strength of that neuroses. It's a very different practice than the practice that I would need, for example, to be liberated from samsara. So there's the famous female practitioner, Yogini, and also the Tibetans believe a female Buddha called Majik Labdron. And she was raped by many men. So normally, this would be a kind of psychological trauma that a worldly person would want to overcome. And so they might go to see a psychotherapist to help them deal with this trauma. But what Majik Labdron did was she bowed down to these individuals as her teachers because they helped her to erode her clinging to self, because her goal wasn't just mundane happiness in this world. Her goal was liberation from samsara. So they're very different practices, and they have very different results and very different purposes. And it depends on the individual and what they want to achieve and what's best for them. So somebody who just wants to be happy, and just being happy is just a worldly goal, isn't really going to enjoy practicing the Buddhist path, because the Buddhist path is quite difficult and involves a lot of hardship. And so if you're trying to avoid hardship, then that's probably not for you, right? It's just that there's different goals. There's different goals in our meditation. And there's even different goals in different levels of school within Buddhism itself. So the Vaibhashikas and the Sautantrikas, then they are looking for the state of arhatship. So this is the Theravada or Hinayana tradition. They're not looking to become a fully enlightened Buddha. So their practices, accordingly, will be different than the practices of somebody, let's say, in the Vajrayana, who's looking for a sort of quick enlightenment or ultimate Buddhahood in one lifetime. So who are these practitioners? Well, they're like Naropa and Milarepa, these sort of people who went through crazy trials and extreme hardship. It's because they were looking for a quick enlightenment. And in Milarepa's case, he was looking for quick enlightenment because he'd killed over 30 people. And he knew as soon as he died, he was going straight to hell. And he was going to be there for a very long time. And so he entered into the Vajrayana path. And one person commented and said, well, then was Milarepa motivated out of fear? You know, and is that a valid motivation for a spiritual practice? Well, the way it's taught is that Milarepa was motivated out of renunciation, really. So you could say that renunciation includes fear. It includes fear of being reborn in samsara. But it's a big topic, and I won't go into it here. So there's different practices, and they are suitable for different people, because different individuals have different goals, aims, and objectives. Some are just looking for happiness in this life. Others want to be reborn in higher realms, for example, in the formless realms, and this is what many Hindus are aiming for. Also, many Christians, quite honestly, are looking to be reborn in heaven and avoid hell. I would say that many people who call themselves Christians probably don't even believe in hell, and they just want to be a good person. But I mean, the basic goal of Christianity is to be accepted into heaven, and that requires unwavering faith in God and extremely good conduct. And there's nothing wrong with extremely good conduct and practicing the Christian path. It's a wonderful thing, and it's suitable for some people. So there's that aspect. Now there's this other point, and that point is, what is the difference between practicing or meditating with concepts, objects, these sort of things, and meditating on the true nature of reality? Previously I talked about Vipassana, right? And this will also appear at the end of the video as a link. Now, there's a difference between Shamatha and Vipassana, and I kind of simplified it to say that you can work with basic objects of meditation, and then you can meditate on insight. Now, the way that this particular practice was explained to me by a local Vipassana practitioner was that they were meditating on expansive awareness or on limitless consciousness. But I also understand that there are other instructions for Vipassana that exist within different schools, and one of them is to meditate on whatever thought arises. And this is kind of similar in the way that modern Theravadian traditions meditate on Vipassana, and also in the Zen tradition. So you sit quietly, and then whatever thoughts arise, you just observe them, right? You just merely observe them, and by observing them, then in the Zen tradition, it's often taught that they kind of pass over the horizon, which is an obvious kind of, metaphor or analogy, right? Because thoughts don't go over the horizon. But what we're saying here is that by just watching thoughts, whatever thoughts arise, without clinging to them, and then they kind of disappear. And that's very similar to the modern instructions that I've heard that exist within the Theravadian tradition. And I think this is specifically maybe in the lineage of Ajahn Chah and these sort of people. And then they're taught just to look at the thoughts as they arise without clinging to them. So I saw a video on this technique, and it was explained very clearly by somebody who obviously has put in the time in his meditation. And from the way he explained it to me, then it was very clear that by seeing thoughts come and go, then he had this kind of idea or belief that the thoughts themselves were somehow ephemeral, right? Now, you can understand that focusing on whatever thought arises is still using an object. Is that correct or not? That if I sit in meditation, calm myself down, whatever you want to do, and then I just sit, and then whatever thought arises, I look at that thought and don't cling to it and let it pass, and then another thought comes, and I'm still using these thoughts as a kind of object of meditation. So it's a focus of my shine, basically. It's a focus of shamatha. Now, the vipassana part of that is the insight. And insight is the recognition, or you could say loosely, the realization of the ephemeral or empty nature of these appearances and these thoughts. Now, that is different from the idea that a thought is ephemeral or doesn't last. So by watching thoughts, we gain this conviction that they're kind of not as solid as we thought they were. And so we come to this belief that these thoughts are fleeting, ephemeral, empty. Well, that's very different from the realization of emptiness. And that's very different from a direct perception of the nature of the thought. Now, here's the problem, is that in order to gain direct experience or direct perception of the actual nature of the thought, not this perceived nature, not the concept of the thought as being empty, etc., but actually to see that directly in your field of perception, we could say, in your experience, then that requires an extreme amount of diligence. And also, more than likely, that also requires guidance by an experienced teacher. And what that is actually seeing the nature or seeing the thought for what it is. Actually perceiving that thought like that and not becoming convinced of its empty nature. There's many different ways to gain conviction, or you could say certainty. We'll use this word certainty loosely because it has a very specific meaning in Tibetan Buddhism. But to gain this sort of conviction or certainty that the thought is empty or ephemeral, then there are many, many different techniques. And most of them are kind of logical arguments or kind of analogies and metaphors that are used. And this is what most of the non-dual teachers use. They will say, for example, Rupert Spear, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but he'll say, I am aware, and then remove aware, and you've got I am. And so you've got these kind of, really they're intellectual games, and they're ways of drawing your mind closer to understanding the fact that there is perhaps emptiness or that there is universal consciousness, whatever it is. But that doesn't give you a direct perception of it. That just kind of makes you more comfortable with the idea. And becoming more comfortable with the idea is very useful because it makes you a kind of calmer person and you cling less to these thoughts. I said before many times then, it's this clinging to thoughts and clinging to reality, which is the source of our suffering, and the purpose of our spiritual practice is to reduce or get rid of our clinging, right? I've said that many times. It's generally accepted by, I guess, most spiritual teachers. But there is a kind of leap between that strong conviction in emptiness and realization of emptiness. So the path of study that I've referred to before, this path of vast study, is a way of coming closer and closer and closer and closer to understanding the true nature of reality. But that's not the same as a realization or experience or direct perception of the true nature of reality. And by doing that with great intensity over many years, then you kind of put yourself in a good position to then realize that truth in your meditation. And so the path of vast study or investigation requires great diligence, and you have to look into these logical arguments and these conceptual ideas, the thought experiments, you could say. You look into them in great detail, makes the mind very kind of malleable, pliable, very accepting of the idea. Also, you can understand it from many different angles. That's called understanding. And then by working in your meditation with great diligence, then these little moments of experience will arise. Okay, so I've discussed this before in a previous video. This understanding, experience, and realization. And then in response to this video in particular, then many people say, well, why are you giving us more concepts to deal with? These aren't concepts. These are things that you can experience in your own life, in your own practice, very easily. Because you can study an idea until you understand it. You have an understanding of that. And then by contemplating on that, then you can gain an experience of how that arises in mind. So these are all kind of real things. We can call them real, let's say. Provisioning will call them real. They're things that can arise to your mind. And it's once those experiences, initially those experiences are very kind of short-lived. They're instantaneous, just single moments of an understanding of how that concept, like emptiness, that you have played with mentally and intellectually, how that arises to mind. And you kind of go, oh, that must be an experience of so-and-so. And it's once those experiences become unchanging and permanent that we can say realization. And that's an incredibly difficult leap. The leap from understanding to small experiences arising is a much easier jump than that leap from experiences to realization. But people don't understand this. And the reason why they don't understand this is because they haven't put enough hours into sincere, dedicated, unmistaken practice. Because it only arises when you do that. Unless you're some exceptional being like Guru Rinpoche. Guru Rinpoche, his teacher just went like this and pointed at the sky and he realized the nature of mind. We're not like that. You can kid yourself on that you've got the ability of the great masters of the past or Guru Rinpoche or something like that. But it's not going to serve you in any way. At best, it's just going to make you an egomaniac. So you have to be diligent in applying yourself to this investigation to come to understand the true nature of reality. And there's different ways. There's this first way, which is the path of vast study, and that involves working with these concepts and things. And you have to do it with great diligence. It won't happen just from thinking you've understood or grasped what a teacher is saying. I was looking at some of Rupert Spira's videos, and most of his students start off with a kind of statement like, well, I've understood this point, but then there's something else I don't understand. And one woman said that. She said, she was basically implying that she understood his instructions. And then she said, but there's one thing I don't understand. Is where do thoughts come from, for example? And it's like, this is a completely fundamental aspect of understanding mind, is to understand this idea of how thoughts arise, etc. And so the question begs to be asked is, well, what did she understand if she doesn't understand this main point? So you have these logical arguments, concepts, analogies, metaphors, mental experiments, intellectual dallying, which leads one to greater understanding, and then you can gain experience and realization. That's one way. The other way is through direct perception. Now, many people think that this direct path, or this path of direct perception, is somehow a shortcut. It's easier than the path of vast study. Basically, we're lazy, we don't want to have to study, and so we're looking for a shortcut, and we hear the word direct, and we think, well, that sounds easier. I'll go for that one. It's not whatsoever. That involves sitting very, very diligently in meditation and actually coming to understand what appearances are. It's not merely a case of sitting there and just letting thoughts pass through your mind. Sitting there and letting thoughts pass through your mind without clinging to them is a kind of very powerful way of settling the mind. It's a very powerful kind of shine. But from there, from that point of being able to not cling to these thoughts and understand their nature is another huge leap. And that leap will not necessarily bring realization. That leap may only bring understanding. Again, remember, there's these stages of understanding, experience, and realization. That leap of just watching thoughts pass in the mind to understanding their nature, which isn't the same as experience and realization, is quite a big leap. And it won't necessarily lead to realization. In fact, it probably won't. So then how does this process work? Well, you need a very close student and teacher relationship. The teacher really needs to understand the way the student thinks. And because of that, and this usually only happens between teachers and students who have a very close relationship and have spent a lot of time together. Unless the teacher is omniscient, right? This is one of the qualities they say that a Lama needs. They need to have this omniscience. And there's a good reason for it, because it's only based on understanding the minds of others that you can really successfully guide them. And this is what the Buddha had. The Buddha had this ability to see when somebody's karma was ripe for a particular action to have effect. So we don't have that. We don't meet teachers like that because we just don't have the requisite karma, you know. So what we have to work with is familiarity. And you need closeness between the teacher and the student. And also the teacher has to understand this process and have understanding and realization of their own, or at least some kind of experience or just mundane understanding of the process. And then they can work with that to help the student to come to greater understanding. And what they'll do is they'll give the student some kind of suggestions or questions. I mean, there's many different ways it can be done. If the teacher is very skillful, then there are many, many different ways in which the teacher can sort of guide the student to come to understand their own perception. I mean directly understand it. I don't mean conceptually understand it. So when you ask somebody to visualize a black dot in their mind, like a round spot or something like that, then you're not asking them to understand a concept, right? You're not talking about this fundamental awareness. You're not talking about limitless consciousness. You're not giving them any concepts to look at. You're just saying, well, what appears? And this is what the student has to work with. But it's not easy. If you've tried to do visualization or to directly observe something that arises to mind, then it's not that simple. The problem is most people have never put the time in, and so they just have a lot of assumptions about what thoughts are and how they arise. And so they don't get the point when you ask them. I mean, you could try it yourself. You could do a bit of meditation and try to visualize something very, very simple. And I suggest it should be simple. In my own case, when I was in retreat, then we're given, in the Vajrayana, we're given very, very difficult kind of visualizations to play with. And they're incredibly detailed on all kinds of different levels and colors and shapes and all that sort of thing. And really, what gave me kind of insight into what this is all about was by simplifying the visualization down to a very, very, very small point, just at the tip of a knife that was held by the deity. And it was through that I came to understand what this process is about. So I suggest that maybe you can get an idea of what I'm talking about if you try to take something very simple and then try to come to understand how it actually appears to your mind. Not apply any concepts or logic to it, not to, cognize about it or cogitate about it in any way whatsoever, but merely just deal with that direct appearance to your mind. You have to be diligent when you do it. It's not just a matter of saying, well, I tried, it didn't work. You really have to put in time. If you do that, then you may come to have some idea of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this practice of direct perception. I encourage you to do it. There's no kind of danger whatsoever in doing that. It will only give you some kind of greater insight into your meditation. And it's not a waste of time, 100%. Unfortunately for most people, then they won't get it. They won't be able to stabilize their visualization enough to get any kind of even minor insight. And this is the main problem. And this is also why diligence is so important, because we don't apply ourselves enough. We give up too easily. And these things aren't easy in any way. When we did this in retreat, then, I was with people who had been in retreat. And when I talk retreat, I'm talking about cloisters, for years. One fellow did 16 years of retreat. Somebody else had done 8. There was quite a few. These aren't new spiritual practitioners. They're people who've been doing it for years and years, and doing it with great intensity for years and years. And basically, they all found it extremely difficult. So don't kid yourself on that it would be easy. Well, all I hope is that you might get some idea of what the difference is. Not really to teach you about these sort of things, that it would kind of broaden your palette of spiritual practice, and to realize also that everything you've done up until this point has been quite minor and is only scratching the surface. This is the main thing, I think, that you gain, the main understanding you gain once you kind of delve into these things a bit deeper, just beyond preconceptions and assumptions and acceptance of the trite statements of others. Once you get beyond that, then suddenly you realize how all your life you've just been scratching the surface, and how incredibly difficult and profound it is. And that isn't a bad thing, that's a good thing. Realizing the profundity of the Dharma, of spiritual practice, is a wonderful eye-opener, because it shows you the potential. We see here why so many modern spiritual teachers are teaching such a low level of Dharma. It's because they've kind of only scratched the surface, and they've thought that that is the pinnacle of practice. And so they say, you don't need to do anything. All you need to do is rest in the present moment. Because they've convinced themselves they've already discovered the answer. And it matches with what's said in texts, right? So we see it in books, and then we think, oh, that's it, I figured it out. But when you kind of are pushed a bit, and you make that small leap into realizing that you've only scratched the surface, then you understand how profound it is, and also you understand, oh, I see, this is why enlightenment is something so special. Because if I've only scratched the surface, and there's this great, vast, deep and profound ocean of wisdom, then if I were to gain a little bit of this wisdom, understand a little bit of this profundity, I can see how I can progress on a kind of significant level. But whereas if you think that this scratching of the surface is profound, then of course you're going to think that enlightenment and spiritual knowledge are something kind of quite ordinary and commonplace. And that these things are not in any way ordinary or commonplace. So that's my main intention. It's not to teach you, because you're not really my students. I really just saw that there were so many people who were kind of wasting their time with stuff that they've seen on YouTube and not really getting anywhere. And I've met many people in the past. I'm not talking about people I've currently encountered. I've met people who are probably all now dead, who were very elderly many years ago, who had dedicated themselves to spiritual paths for decades and tried everything. And in the end, then we're left wondering what it was all about, Recently, one person who left a comment on one of my videos on Krishnamurti had said that his own experience was that he was really kind of carried away with Krishnamurti when he was young, when he was at university. And the only result from it was that it totally ruined his academic career, because he just got distracted by it all. So don't get distracted. Look into things. Don't be easily satisfied with the statements of others. In your life in general, please be easily satisfied and a few desires. But when it comes to the thirst for spiritual knowledge, then one should never be easily satisfied. One should keep searching. And because there's this great depth, richness, and profundity that is there to be found for everyone, it's accessible to anyone because we all have mind. And then if you get a taste for that and an enthusiasm for your practice, then my wish is that you should be propelled into limitless progress, and then to find the accumulation of limitless wisdom. So it's getting late now, and I have to look after my parents. And thank you for listening, and see you next time.